Review and ensure that you've set up your development environment. Here's a link that mentions this before. So in this sub-lesson, we're talking about AWS CodePipeline. So with CodePipeline, you have stages, and these stages are other tools. Sometimes you're going to see running certain commands to say build and test and deploy and release your service. At the time of this recording, there are 6 different action types in CodePipeline. You have source, you have build, you have tests, deploy, invoke, and approval. And build, test, and deploy. And actually, so you can run these actions within a stage. All the actions are successful. So you can enable and you can disable transitions, the stages. So you can enable and disable those transitions. You're going to be learning about another. Look at this figure here. The transitions, revisions, and action provider types in CodePipeline. And so we can name this whatever we want, but we have, to start off, we have this source stage, and then we have, it needs to have at least one source action within the source stage. And so this one is using a source stage as GitHub. You'll see most of the examples we'll be going over in this live lesson. And that code is a part of a revision in CodePipeline. So it refers to that revision. If you actually click on that revision, it goes directly to the source, if it's GitHub or code commit or whatever source provider you happen to be using. And then here we have a transition between the stages, and you can disable those if you want to turn it off temporarily if you're having some errors while you work those out, or for whatever reason. Deploy stage. Again, you can call these, there's a naming convention or a naming standard that you're able. And then we have another action within that deploy stage called an artifact. And it's using AWS Code Build as its provider. And so we'll see some of the different examples of which you can pass into this. We can see that this is in progress. I can click on the details, see what's going on, and then I can see the comments associated with that particular revision. So with CodePipeline, you're and starting from the source repository to building, testing, deploying those changes out to production. You can also prevent change, actually inject gates into the process, and you can do that using approvals. And so you can have say you have user acceptance testing or something like that, where people are maybe doing exploratory testing and they want to have you want to have a gate associated with that, but you still want to put all of those different activities into the pipeline. You're able to do that with CodePipeline. And so you can automatically release in the way that you want. For every code change, so that it goes through those same steps every single time. those actions. You're able to speed up your delivery. If you're automating that release process, you allow your developers to, so you can make these small changes and then find out if those changes work, that change to production. And so you're ultimately able to speed up that process because you're able to get feedback. You're able to use your favorite tools. So while AWS CodePipeline works with lots of different AWS services, you can also work with third-party providers. And AWS CodePipeline provides some of the built-in integrations with some of those third-party providers, whether it's GitHub or Solano or BlazeMeter or any of the. So write custom actions, and you can integrate really with any provider that you have. So you can view the progress at a glance. You're able to look at CodePipeline dashboard, and you're able to look at the stages and actions. You can see if an error occurs, which stage it occurred in, which action. You can click on the action, and then you can go right to the error. And whether it's, say, in code build or in code deploy or one of the third-party tools, you can directly link to that and get more information to find out how you need to fix that particular issue. Details. Each stage has a unique name within CodePipeline. You can in this stage that are part of the CodePipeline workflow. A stage can only process one revision at a time. So you can have, let's say you have 10 actions or revision within that stage, and it has to go through all 10 of those actions. So if you just made a going to the downstream stage, the subsequent stage, until it's that automatically transitions the revision to the next stage. So some of the key limits to keep in mind. In terms of the number of stages, that is 2. So you need to have a source stage and then at least some other stage associated with the pipeline. Stages. Number of actions in a stage, minimum 1. In all those 50 actions in parallel as well. So if you're running, say, tests or something like that, you can run 50 tests. Sequential actions in a stage is so if you want to find more information, you can see the link here of the limits in requirements that goes over what I really just described in terms of the stages and the actions and the different providers, third-party integrations, things like that. So in terms of actions, you're able to identify that by the run order. And so here we have the different action types. And so there's 6 different action types, as I mentioned. So we have source action type. In terms of the supported providers, you can provide do GitHub, and you can do ECR. And because Amazon S3 is source providers as well that aren't a native support provider within CodePipeline. So just keep that in mind. And then in terms of the support providers for build, you have AWS third-party providers as well. Solano Labs is one of those. To run test actions as well. So you're running unit tests, integration. As a test action, but then there's To deploy action types, there's a number of different providers that AWS supports. AWS CodeDeploy, CloudFormation will be using that in this live lesson. As well. As I mentioned, you can write your own custom actions, so you can support whatever provider that you need to support as long as you're able to write a custom action with it. So the fifth action type is invoke. With invoke, the support provider is AWS Lambda, so you can directly run AWS Lambda. You can invoke AWS Lambda functions, which provide. And then lastly, you can run an approval. This is a manual email. They get notifications to say that they need to acceptance testing stage, and so it goes right to that stage. They're able to. There might be a link there that has them go to the working application in staging and what have you, and they're able to run through their tests, and then they're able to go back to CodePipeline and approve it, and then it goes on to either deploy to production or whatever the downstream into your overall fully automated process. Concept in CodePipeline to understand. So each action you can declare an input and an output artifact. And these get stored in an encrypted way in an S3 bucket. And so these artifacts are objects that we'll either expect to have before it runs, or these are objects that get produced that are made available after it runs. So the most common example is you might have put artifact. The source action gets the latest from the Git repository and then stores all those files in an S3 bucket in an encrypted manner, and then that's used as the output artifact. That output artifact is then used as an input artifact in the subsequent. So in this figure, you see an example of this, and so we have an input artifact. This might say be in a build stage, so after a source stage, it gets the source artifacts that were defined as an output artifact in one of the previous stages, the source stage. And then we have an output artifact. Artifacts, you can call them whatever you want, but you can call them whatever you want when you define them, but you need to refer to them based on that logical name that you already chose whenever you use them again. So we'll see an example of this as well. And in revision, that you make to the source that gets configured in a push commit to a GitHub repository code commit, or an update that you make to an Amazon S3 stage. So some of the benefits of CodePipeline is you're able to have rapid delivery, right? You're able to automate your whole software release process. Allows you to rapidly release new features to users, and you're able to make these incremental changes. You're able to configure that workflow, so you can define whether or not you have 50 parallel actions, or how many different stages that you have, or which third-party providers that you use. You can also automate all this through CloudFormation, which you'll be seeing a lot of in this live lesson. So you can get started with AWS CodePipeline fast. You're able to integrate with third-party providers. So those are some of the key benefits that you'll see with AWS Pipeline in this course. Is we're going to be creating a continuous delivery workflow for compliance. So a lot of people change or data change, but you could do the same with security and compliance. And so that's the whole purpose of this course, is to show you how you can automate all of these resources. CloudFormation, you can provision it, but you can also then put it through a complete software delivery workflow that's fully automated as well, using AWS CodePipeline. So that's how we're going to be using CodePipeline in this course. So let's go through an exercise. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go back and we've already cloned that code commit repository, so if you already haven't done so, you should go through that exercise at this moment. And so what we'll Okay, so now we're going to create a README file. So it's an empty README file. And then we're just going to put some text. We could put whatever text we want here. And I'm going to save those changes. And then I'm going to do, if you're not familiar with Git, then these are just some basic commands that you're going to be using all the time in Git. So you've seen some of this already, but so I'm going to add the file or a file. So in this case, I'm just doing the dot is referring to the current directory, so I'm just going to add those files, and then I'm going to on all these at once, and it's going to push it up to that code commit repository. So we can take a look at that. File that I just put in here. Okay, so now we're going to create a deployment pipeline using we're going to click Create Pipeline. We'll give it a access management service role for us. And this just gives gives CodePipeline the proper permissions to run the actions in this pipeline. So next thing we do is click Next. Source stage in this pipeline. And so the repository name is that same repository we created in setting up our development environment. The branch in terms of the change detection, we're using Amazon CloudWatch events for that, and then we just click on Next. In terms of the build provider, we're not going to use build provider. This is just a really simple pipeline, just to go through the process of creating a pipeline. So we're going to have a source stage, and we're going to have a deploy stage. So we're going to skip the build stage. We're going to use Amazon S3, and we're going to put it in that same bucket that we created when we set up our development environment. And so this is my name. So I just put that bucket name in. And then I can call this key essentially whatever I want, as long as it aligns with the names that you can use for S3. But I'm just going to call it my deployment zip. And essentially what this and then we click on Next. And then we review. We check the pipeline deploy stage, and then we click Create Pipeline. Okay, so now we can see the pipeline is running. So we have those two stages that we set up before. We have the source stage, the action provider, code commit. I can see it goes right to my code commit repo. And I can that's associated with this as well. And so I can forth. I can disable transition. I can disable it, and you can see that turns it off. It means it's not going to go to any of those subsequent stage, or it's not going to go to that downstream stage. I can enable it as well. And then I can see this deploy stage, and I have a deploy action as well. And then I'm going to in S3, that S3 bucket, and I can see the changes that it makes. And I can see that if I look at the list of objects, I can see that I have a my deployment zip file, and in that zip it turns red if any error. So we'll see an error later on in this live lesson as well. But there's lots of things I can do here. I can edit the pipeline. I can edit a particular stage, so I can say add another action to this stage. So if I want to look at multiple artifact. I can create a code build project. I'm not going to go through that process now. Page. I can automatically start my pipeline and go through that process, even if it wasn't triggered from a code commit change as it's currently configured. I history associated with my pipeline. I can go into more detail associated with that. I can see how I got triggered, see how long it took. This is pretty useful when you start to do things like value stream mapping. You look at the end-to-end process of how long a pipeline might take. I can actually clone that pipeline. So if I like a pipeline that I worked on, but I want to make a few changes to it, I can clone it and make a copy of that pipeline itself. But of course, we can automate all this as well. Enable a transition, enable it. I went to the specific revision link. We did this through the console itself, but I can go to the command line, and I just disabled that stage, and then I can go back and so I go back to the pipeline, and we can see that I've enabled the stage. So we can do same types. Lots of different ways of going about this. I can export a pipeline, and so I go back to the command line. Here, and this becomes really useful with that pipeline. Where this becomes most useful is when you start to want to automate a pipeline. You can use the CodePipeline console, different stages and actions that you want to set up. But then when you want to automate that process, you could take the export from line, which is I just ran AWS CodePipeline get pipeline, gave them the name, and then I have it exported to a JSON file. This is the JSON file, and so we can see that as a part of this. We can see the names, the actions. There's no input artifact. It generates an output artifact, a source artifact, which is console. The configuration game that we're using, the master branch, which pages and all the other components that to automate the process, say in CloudFormation later on down the line. I can edit. When I click on edit, I can delete and just type delete and get rid of that pipeline so it's no longer there. So I have a couple of additional resources of creating a pipeline using the AWS CodePipeline console, a tutorial that uses Amazon S3 as your deployment provider. And then lastly, if you need to, you can clean up any of the resources that are associated. Putting those pieces together, both CloudFormation and CodePipeline deployment pipeline using each of those services.